It was just another day at the Tesla factory. The hum of machines, the clang of metal on metal, and the steady rhythm of workers assembling electric vehicles filled the air. Elon Musk stood at the observation deck, his eyes scanning the production line, lost in thought as he monitored the progress of the latest batch of cars. He wasn't one to get caught up in the minutiae of the daily operations. He had 1,000 other things on his mind. But there was something about today that felt different. As he watched the workers, one figure caught his eye. Jake, a young guy with shaggy brown hair and a look of quiet determination, was doing his usual routine. Jake was one of the newer employees, always going the extra mile. He stayed late to perfect his work, and his attitude was nothing short of dedicated. Elon had noticed him before, but today, something felt off. Jake moved with an intensity that seemed almost too forced, like he was trying to outrun something, but there was a visible weariness in his eyes. Elon's gaze followed him as Jake wiped his brow with the back of his hand, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Is everything all right with Jake?" Elon asked one of the supervisors who was standing beside him. The supervisor shrugged, not really giving an answer. "He's a hard worker, Mr. Musk. Always stays late, but he doesn't seem to have any personal issues. At least, none that we know of." Elon's eyes narrowed. Jake was always around, always present. But today, there was something in his posture that didn't sit right with Elon. He hadn't heard any complaints about Jake's work ethic, yet something about the young man's demeanor made Elon feel uneasy. It was then that Elon saw Jake do something he hadn't noticed before. After his shift ended, while most of the other workers filtered out, Jake didn't join them. Instead, he slipped out the back door, heading toward the parking lot in a hurry. Elon, curious, followed at a distance, trying to figure out what was going on. Jake's car wasn't parked in the employee lot. It was a beat-up old sedan that had clearly seen better days. Scratched paint, a dented bumper, and the kind of car that looked like it belonged to someone who had fallen on hard times. Elon's heart sank as he watched Jake get into the car and drive off. It wasn't just any car. It was a car that seemed to scream financial struggle. Where's he going? Elon thought to himself. That was when it hit him. What if Jake wasn't just struggling at work? What if the young man was battling something much bigger than anyone realized? Something that wasn't just affecting his job performance, but his life outside of work. Elon hadn't noticed it before, but now, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He had seen many employees come and go, each with their own stories and struggles, but Jake's was different. In the back of his mind, Elon asked himself the question he'd never considered before. What if this guy was hiding something from all of us? The next morning, Elon decided he couldn't just let this go. He had to find out the truth. What would he discover? What kind of twist was waiting to unfold? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jake had always been the kind of person who preferred to keep his head down. He didn't ask for much, and certainly never expected sympathy. Raised in a small, tight-knit town in Michigan, Jake learned from a young age that life wasn't easy. His family had never been rich, but they got by, scraping together what they could to stay afloat. His father, a mechanic, worked long hours, fixing cars that were often beyond repair, while his mother took up odd jobs cleaning houses just to make ends meet. Jake was their oldest child, and from the beginning, he felt the weight of responsibility. He didn't mind. It gave him purpose. He was smart, hardworking, and determined to make something of himself. Unlike some of his classmates who had big dreams of being athletes or famous musicians, Jake had always known what he wanted: a job at Tesla. Elon Musk's company represented the future, the very thing Jake had dreamed about ever since he saw one of their first cars during a visit to a local dealership. While most kids his age were focusing on high school drama and weekend parties, Jake spent his free time reading about electric vehicles and innovations in the tech industry. He applied for scholarships, worked part-time jobs, and eventually earned a spot in an engineering program at a local university. It wasn't an easy road, but Jake's grit and determination saw him through. But things didn't always go as planned. Just before graduation, Jake's mother was diagnosed with cancer. The timing couldn't have been worse. Her medical bills piled up, and his family found themselves struggling to make ends meet. Jake put aside his own future to help take care of her. He worked extra shifts at a local diner, trying to save money, but nothing seemed to be enough. His dream of working for Tesla seemed to fade into the background as he scrambled to keep his family afloat. Despite the overwhelming stress, Jake managed to graduate and apply for a job at Tesla. To his surprise, he got in. It wasn't his first choice to be an entry-level worker on the factory floor, but it was a foot in the door. At first, it seemed like a dream come true. He was finally part of the company he had admired for so long. But the pressure of supporting his mother's medical expenses and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy began to take its toll. He'd spend 12-hour shifts on the assembly line, only to rush home to a cramped apartment where he'd spend another few hours caring for his mom. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of his responsibilities began to wear him down. Jake never let his personal struggles show at work, though. He believed that the only thing people saw when they looked at him was his dedication. He didn't want to be pitted or seen as weak. He wasn't about to ask for help, not from his colleagues, and certainly not from the higher-ups. He'd been raised to believe that asking for help was a sign of failure, and he wasn't going to let anyone see him fall apart. But his mother's health continued to deteriorate. Medical bills piled up higher and higher, and Jake began to fall behind on rent. He was getting by, but just barely. Every night, he fell asleep wondering how much longer he could keep it all together. Then, one night, the breaking point came. His mother passed away after a long battle with cancer, and the weight of grief settled on him like a heavy blanket. He tried to stay focused at work, but he couldn't stop thinking about what would come next. Without his mother to care for, and with no immediate family to turn to, Jake's financial situation became critical. He couldn't afford his rent anymore, and soon enough, he was living in his car. It was a far cry from the apartment he'd once shared with his mom, but it was the only option left. Every day, he would wake up before dawn to get to work on time, spending his nights parked in random parking lots or sometimes in the factory's backlot. The car became his only refuge, a place where he could rest, even if just for a few hours. Jake didn't tell anyone. He couldn't. He'd never let anyone know how desperate he had become. He kept his struggles hidden behind his ever-present work ethic, hoping no one would ask too many questions. If people saw him as a hard-working employee, then maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't notice that he was falling apart on the inside. But as the days went on, it became harder and harder to keep up the facade. Exhaustion crept in, affecting his performance. His colleagues began to notice that Jake wasn't as focused as he used to be, but no one dared to ask. They all had their own problems, their own lives to deal with. And then Elon noticed. The tension at the Tesla factory was becoming palpable. Elon Musk's curiosity about Jake's unusual behavior had only intensified. Over the past few days, he had watched the young worker with an increasing sense of concern. Jake was a good employee, one of the best, in fact, but something was off. He was always tired, often distracted, and seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Elon had seen many employees deal with personal challenges, but there was something about Jake that made him stand out. It wasn't just the fact that he was working late into the night. It was how he would disappear just after his shift ended, sneaking out of the factory as if he was trying to avoid being seen. He didn't drive a Tesla like the others. Instead, he drove a beat-up old car, which wasn't like the typical vehicles parked in the lot. It wasn't the first time Elon had noticed Jake's odd behavior, but it was the first time he began to piece things together. Elon wasn't one to get involved in the personal lives of his employees, but there was something in Jake's eyes, a quiet desperation, that Elon couldn't ignore. Elon decided to act. The next day, he asked one of the supervisors, "Is Jake doing all right? He's been acting a little off lately." The supervisor shrugged. "He's been putting in a lot of hours, Mr. Musk, but no complaints, just working hard like always. I don't think there's an issue." Elon wasn't convinced. He had been around long enough to recognize when someone was struggling, even if they were trying to hide it. There was more to Jake's story than the supervisor realized, and Elon needed to know what it was. That night, after his usual round of meetings, Elon decided to follow Jake. It wasn't something he'd normally do. He valued privacy and personal space for his employees. But this felt different. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and he had to find out what it was. At the end of Jake's shift, Elon watched from a distance as Jake clocked out. As expected, Jake didn't head to the employee lot where all the Teslas were parked. Instead, he walked toward the back of the factory, as if trying to slip away unnoticed. Elon followed, staying out of sight. Jake reached the parking lot and stood for a moment, glancing around as if making sure no one was watching. Then he got into his car, a rusted, old sedan, and drove off without a second glance. Elon's stomach twisted. There was no way that was a car Jake could afford on a Tesla salary. The kind of vehicle he was driving was a far cry from the sleek, high-tech machines they produced at the factory. Elon couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. How had he not seen it before? Jake wasn't just a dedicated worker. He was barely holding it together. That night, Elon couldn't shake the image of Jake driving away in that dilapidated car. The more he thought about it, the more it troubled him. Jake's car wasn't just a sign of financial struggle. It was a sign that something deeper was wrong, something Jake wasn't willing to talk about. Elon wasn't the type to let things slide. If one of his employees was struggling, he had to step in. But what was the right way to approach this? How could he offer help without making Jake feel embarrassed or ashamed? Elon didn't want to be the kind of boss who only cared about the numbers. He cared about people, and right now, Jake needed help. The following day, Elon decided to act on his hunch. He asked one of the supervisors to bring Jake to his office. It was a casual meeting, nothing too formal. But Elon knew this would be the moment to find out the truth. Jake entered the office, looking as composed as ever, though his eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. He stood before Elon, clearly uncomfortable but doing his best to appear calm. "Elon, you wanted to see me?" Jake asked, his voice steady, but there was a slight tremor that Elon caught. "Yes, Jake," Elon replied, gesturing for him to sit. "I've been noticing you've been working hard, but I also noticed you've seemed a bit off lately. Is everything all right?" Jake's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, Elon saw him hesitate. He shifted in his seat, clearly wrestling with the decision to open up. But then, in a quiet voice, Jake spoke. "I'm fine, Mr. Musk. I've been putting in a lot of hours. Nothing more to it." Elon leaned forward, not buying it. "Jake, I've been around long enough to know when someone's not telling the full story. You don't have to be afraid to talk about what's going on. If there's something you need, something I can do to help, just let me know." There was a long pause. Jake's face flushed, and for a moment, Elon thought he might just brush it off and leave. But then, his guard cracked, and he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to say this, but I've been living in my car for the last few months." Elon sat back, stunned. "What? Jake, why didn't you say something earlier?" Jake looked away, his face a mix of shame and frustration. "I didn't want anyone to feel sorry for me. I didn't want anyone to think I couldn't handle it. I've been trying to keep it together, but it's been harder than I thought." Elon's heart sank. The image of Jake, the hard-working young man who never complained, struggling in silence, hit him harder than he expected. This wasn't just a case of financial hardship, it was a cry for help. Jake's voice faltered. "I don't know what to do anymore. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want anyone to look at me differently." Elon took a deep breath. This wasn't just about offering a paycheck or a handout. This was about doing something that would change Jake's life, something that would give him hope. Elon sat across from Jake, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Here he was, sitting in his office with a young man who had been quietly enduring the kind of hardship that most people would never understand. Jake had tried to shoulder it all on his own, and now, the truth was out in the open. Elon had to decide what to do next, and it wasn't going to be an easy choice. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence in the room was thick with the weight of Jake's admission. Elon wasn't sure if Jake was waiting for him to say something, or if he was simply lost in his own thoughts, wrestling with the embarrassment of the situation. Finally, Elon broke the silence. "Jake, I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what you're going through, but I do know that no one should have to carry that kind of burden alone. You've worked so hard, and we've seen the dedication you've put into this company. Tesla is about innovation, progress, and that doesn't just apply to technology. It applies to the people who help us make it all happen. And right now, you need help." Jake's eyes widened slightly, as if the words he was hearing were too good to be true. He looked at Elon, unsure whether to believe him or not. "You don't have to go through this by yourself," Elon continued. "I want to help you. But first, I need you to tell me what you need. What can I do to get you back on your feet?" Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his mind racing. For so long, he had convinced himself that asking for help was a sign of weakness, something that would make him less of a man. But now, in this moment, he realized he had no choice but to face the reality that he couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I don't know," Jake muttered, his voice barely audible. "I guess I could use a place to stay, but I don't want to take advantage of you." Elon shook his head, his expression serious. "This isn't about taking advantage of anyone. This is about giving you the support you need so you can continue doing what you do best. I want to make sure you're taken care of, Jake. And I know that's not just about giving you a roof over your head. I want to help you get back on track, whether it's finding a more stable living situation, helping with financial support, or even offering counseling services to help you work through everything." Jake was stunned. He had never imagined that someone like Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and one of the wealthiest men in the world, would extend a hand like this. It was beyond what he had hoped for, and yet, it also felt like the first glimpse of a way out of the dark hole he had been stuck in for so long. I don't even know what to say," Jake said quietly, feeling overwhelmed by the kindness in Elon's words. "You don't have to say anything right now," Elon replied with a warm smile. "But I want you to know that you're not alone. I'll have someone help you with finding a place to stay, and we'll make sure you're set up with everything you need. You're part of the Tesla family, Jake, and we take care of each other." For the first time in months, Jake allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Maybe he wouldn't have to keep struggling on his own. Maybe he could finally begin to breathe again. Elon stood up, offering Jake a handshake. "You're a valuable part of this company, Jake. We believe in you, and we're going to help you get through this. Now, let's start turning things around." Jake shook Elon's hand, a sense of relief washing over him. This wasn't just about getting a roof over his head. It was about getting a second chance, a chance to rebuild his life, not just for himself, but for the future he had always dreamed of. As Jake left Elon's office, he couldn't stop smiling. It felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The thought of having a fresh start, of not having to live in fear of what tomorrow might bring, was almost too much to comprehend. But he knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. He had a lot of work to do, both personally and professionally. Yet, for the first time in a long while, Jake felt hope stirring in his chest. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Elon's offer had given him something he hadn't felt in years, possibility. And that was more than enough to start building his new future. The next few days were a whirlwind for Jake. Elon had kept his word. A few hours after their conversation, someone from HR had reached out to Jake, offering a temporary living situation, an apartment near the Tesla campus, fully paid for by the company, and a financial plan that would help him get back on track. There were no strings attached. It was simply a gesture of support. Jake could hardly believe it. For the first time in what felt like forever, he had stability. He had a bed to sleep in. The crushing weight of uncertainty that had followed him for months started to lift. For once, he didn't feel like he was drowning. He could focus on his work without the constant fear of losing everything. And yet, as much as he appreciated Elon's help, a part of him felt guilty. He had never expected this kind of generosity from anyone, especially someone as influential as Elon Musk. He couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't deserve it. But no matter how much he tried to fight it, Jake couldn't help but feel that the universe had just given him a second chance. That night, Jake lay in the new apartment, staring up at the ceiling. The apartment was modest, but it was more than enough for him. The smell of fresh paint filled the air, and the sound of the refrigerator humming in the corner was strangely comforting. He hadn't had his own space in so long. It felt almost surreal to think that this was his now. But the relief he was feeling would soon be replaced by a shocking revelation. The following morning, after getting settled into his new place, Jake returned to work at Tesla, eager to prove that he was ready to move forward. As soon as he arrived, something felt off. The air in the factory was heavier than usual, and the workers seemed to be speaking in hushed tones, exchanging worried glances. Jake, still not fully adjusted to the shift in his life, tried to ignore the unease that bubbled up inside him. He made his way to the break room, where a few of his colleagues were gathered. They quickly quieted down when Jake walked in, and he could feel the tension thickening in the room. "Everything okay?" Jake asked, a bit confused. One of his colleagues, Mark, glanced at him with a look of concern before lowering his voice. "Have you heard the news?" Jake frowned. "What news?" Mark exchanged glances with a few others, clearly unsure of whether or not to say anything. Finally, he spoke. Elon's stepping down." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "What? No way. You're kidding, right?" Mark shook his head. "It's true. The board's been talking about it for weeks. There's been a lot of pressure on him lately about the direction of the company and, well, other personal stuff. It's all over the news." Jake's mind was racing. Elon stepping down? That was impossible. Elon Musk wasn't just the face of Tesla. He was Tesla. The company had always been a reflection of his vision, his ambition. The idea of Elon not being involved felt like a dagger to the heart of the entire company. "Are they sure about this?" Jake asked, his voice shaky. "Yeah. Word is, he's already made up his mind. I don't know what this means for the future of the company, but," Mark trailed off, looking at Jake with an expression that seemed to say, "I'm sorry, but you might be next." Jake's stomach sank. The news felt like a punch to the gut. He had just begun to believe that his life was finally turning around, and now, this? Elon, the one person who had given him a second chance, was going to leave? As Jake left the break room and made his way to the factory floor, the weight of the news pressed heavily on him. How could this happen? Tesla was Elon's creation, his dream. Everything they had worked for, everything Jake had believed in, was tied to him. Without Elon, would the company still be the same? Would he still have a place there? The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jake did his best to keep up with his duties, but his mind kept drifting back to the conversation in the break room. Elon was the reason he had a second chance. Would that chance now be gone? At the end of his shift, Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Elon. "Jake, I know the news may be unsettling, but I want you to know that Tesla will always be about its people. You're one of the most dedicated workers we have, and I believe in you. No matter what happens with the company, your future is in your hands now. You've got what it takes to succeed, and I'm here to support you." Jake stared at the message, his heart pounding. Elon was leaving, yes, but the words in that text were a lifeline. Elon believed in him. Jake wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to start believing in himself, too. For the first time since the news broke, Jake smiled. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let this setback define him. He had already overcome so much, and he was stronger for it. Whatever came next, he was ready. As he read the message again, Jake's phone rang. It was Elon. "Jake," Elon's voice came through, calm and reassuring. "I know this is a lot to process, but I want you to understand that this is not the end. It's just a new chapter. And you're part of that future." Jake's throat tightened, but he managed to find his voice. "Thank you for everything." Elon's chuckle was warm. "It's my pleasure, Jake. Now, go out there and show them what you're made of." The days that followed Elon's departure were filled with uncertainty for Tesla, but Jake found himself more focused than ever. Despite the challenges the company faced, one thing was clear. It was no longer just about the brand or the technology. It was about the people who made it all possible. And Jake, for the first time in his life, truly believed he could be one of those people. The company had announced a temporary leadership structure while they searched for a permanent replacement, but Jake knew that the true heart of Tesla had always been the innovation, the ambition, and the courage to take risks. Elon's influence would never fade, but the real power of the company was in the hands of the employees, the ones who worked tirelessly day in and day out to bring his vision to life. Jake found himself working harder than he ever had before. The drive that had once been dimmed by his personal struggles was now reignited. He spent late nights at the factory, collaborating with colleagues to fine-tune processes, brainstorm new ideas, and keep the momentum going. Tesla was in a pivotal moment, But Jake knew that the company's future didn't rest solely on the shoulders of one man. It rested on the collective strength of every person who believed in the mission. In the weeks that followed, Jake's confidence grew. With his personal life beginning to stabilize, he was able to focus more on his work, and it showed. His innovative ideas started gaining attention from senior leadership, and his contributions were becoming increasingly valuable to the team. But it wasn't just about work. Elon's message still resonated in Jake's mind. Your future is in your hands now. It was a message that Jake took to heart. With his new apartment and financial stability, he began to think about the future in ways he never had before. He realized that while Elon had given him a second chance, it was ultimately up to him to make the most of it. And so, he did. Jake took small but significant steps in rebuilding his life. He began attending therapy sessions to work through the emotional scars of his past. He started volunteering at local shelters, offering help to those who were still living the kind of life he had once known. Through it all, Jake learned the true meaning of resilience. Not just bouncing back, but growing stronger from the experience. One day, as Jake was leaving work, he received another message from Elon. This time, it wasn't a text, it was a phone call. Jake, I've been hearing a lot of great things about your work. The team is really impressed with your contributions, and I think you're ready for the next step, Elon said, his voice as confident and reassuring as always. Jake couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. Thank you, Elon. I wouldn't be where I am without your help. You earned it, Elon replied with a smile in his voice. But I want you to know that you've proven something much more important than just your work ethic. You've proven that no matter the circumstances, you can rise up and make a difference. That's the true mark of a leader. Jake felt a lump form in his throat, his emotions swelling at the unexpected praise. Elon's belief in him, combined with his own hard work, had changed the course of his life. He wasn't just a worker at Tesla anymore. He was a part of something bigger, a community of people who were working toward a common goal. And that was everything. Over the next few months, Jake continued to rise through the ranks at Tesla. His dedication and passion did not go unnoticed, and he found himself in a leadership role, guiding others just as he had once been guided. The sense of fulfillment he felt as he led projects and mentored colleagues was indescribable. It was a new kind of success, not just about achievement, but about purpose. One afternoon, as Jake stood in the Tesla factory, looking over a new prototype, he took a moment to reflect. He thought about the young man who had walked into Elon's office months ago, desperate and lost, with no idea where his life was headed. He thought about the company that had supported him, the people who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. And he thought about Elon, the man who had shown him that second chances weren't just about survival, but about transformation. It wasn't just the success of Tesla that mattered anymore. What mattered was the lesson Jake had learned along the way, that every person has the potential to change their life, no matter the obstacles they face. Jake was no longer just a survivor. He was a leader, a mentor, and an advocate for change. And as he looked at the future ahead, he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. With each passing day, Jake's transformation became evident not just to himself, but to everyone around him. His newfound confidence and drive rippled through the Tesla team, inspiring others to push beyond their limits, just as he had done. His story of overcoming homelessness and his rise within the company became a beacon of hope to those who thought their circumstances defined their future. At Tesla's next team meeting, Jake was asked to speak about his journey, something he never expected to be asked to do. But Elon had always told him to own his story, and now it felt like the right moment to share it. Standing before his colleagues, Jake took a deep breath. "I don't have all the answers," Jake began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But what I do know is that every obstacle can be an opportunity for growth. When I was homeless, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never amount to anything. But today, I'm standing here, not because I was given everything, but because I refused to let my past define me." The room fell silent, all eyes on him as his colleagues took in his words. Jake continued, "It's easy to think that where you start determines where you'll end up. But I'm here to tell you that's not true. It's the choices you make along the way, the resilience you show in the face of adversity, and the willingness to ask for help when you need it. That's what shapes your future." By the time Jake finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. His story was one of grit, heartache, and the relentless pursuit of change. He didn't just inspire his coworkers, he moved them. They saw in him a reflection of their own potential. If Jake could overcome the darkest days of his life and make it to the top, surely they could rise to new heights too. After the meeting, one of his colleagues, a young engineer named Emily, approached him with tears in her eyes. "Jake, I've been struggling with my own personal issues," she admitted. "But hearing your story has made me realize that I've been holding myself back. If you can make it through what you've been through, I can do better too." "Thank you." Jake smiled, feeling a wave of pride and gratitude. "We all have our battles, Emily. But what matters is that we keep going." Jake's impact wasn't limited to that one meeting. His story spread like wildfire within the company. Employees who had been struggling, both personally and professionally, began reaching out to him for advice. They saw him as a mentor now, someone who had not only risen through the ranks but had done so with humility, compassion, and a sense of purpose. Jake began hosting small group sessions where employees could come together to talk about their challenges, both in and out of the workplace. He shared his experiences, not to garner sympathy, but to show that success wasn't a straight path. It was filled with bumps, setbacks, and struggles, but each challenge was an opportunity for growth. He also made sure that Tesla's leadership remained focused on its people. His own journey had taught him how essential it was for a company to take care of its employees, not just through fair pay and benefits, but through empathy, support, and understanding. One day, during a company-wide event, Elon gave a speech that moved everyone in the room. "Jake's story is a testament to what we believe in here at Tesla," Elon said, his voice filled with sincerity. "We're not just here to build great cars or innovate in technology. We're here to build a community of people who believe in each other and support each other." Jake's journey is proof that no matter where you start, you can create your own path and make a difference. Hearing Elon's words, Jake felt a wave of emotion wash over him. It was one thing to have support from his colleagues, but to hear Elon, the person who had given him a chance in the first place, speak so highly of him was validation he never thought he would receive. For the first time, Jake felt like he truly belonged, not just at Tesla, but in the world. His past, once a source of shame and guilt, had become his greatest strength. It was the foundation of everything he had achieved and everything he would continue to build. In the weeks and months that followed, Jake continued to thrive at Tesla. His journey was no longer a lonely one. He had built a network of like-minded individuals who were determined to uplift one another. Together, they worked harder than ever, driven not just by the success of the company, but by the understanding that each person's success was intertwined with the success of the whole. Jake's rise to leadership didn't just stop with his professional achievements. He continued to be a source of inspiration to everyone around him. He reminded people that no matter how tough life got, they always had the power to change their own narrative. And that was the greatest lesson he had ever learned. As time passed, Tesla began to reflect the values Jake had brought into the company. It wasn't just about making groundbreaking technology anymore. It was about creating an environment where people thrived, where each individual felt seen, valued, and supported. Jake, in his own way, had helped guide the company through one of its most challenging transitions. His personal journey had become the metaphor for what the company could be. Not just a place where work got done, but a place where lives could be transformed. Jake's role had evolved over the months. He wasn't just a leader in terms of operations and innovation. He had become a symbol of what was possible. He'd been given the chance to rebuild his life, and now he was helping others rebuild theirs. Whether it was through mentorship, leadership, or simply offering a listening ear. But things weren't without their challenges. Tesla was still recovering from the uncertainty of Elon's departure, and though the temporary leadership had steered the company through the worst of it, Jake knew that it was only a matter of time before Tesla needed a new CEO to guide them through the next phase. That moment came sooner than Jake expected. One afternoon, Jake was called to a meeting with Tesla's board. There, in a small, sleek conference room, Elon Musk himself was sitting at the head of the table. His expression was serious, but there was a warmth in his eyes as he gestured for Jake to sit. "Jake," Elon began, "I've watched you grow over these last few months, and I've seen how you've not only taken on more responsibility, but also how you've inspired others. It's no secret that Tesla is at a crossroads right now. With my stepping down, the company needs a new direction. Someone who not only understands the business but embodies the values we want to maintain. Jake sat quietly, unsure of where the conversation was going, but he had a feeling deep in his gut. Elon paused for a moment, then continued. I believe you're the right person for this job, Jake. I want you to take over as CEO of Tesla. Jake's heart stopped. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze around him. This wasn't just a passing comment or a compliment. Elon was serious. The man who had taken a chance on him, the man who had been the face of Tesla for years, was offering Jake the keys to the kingdom. I don't know what to say, Jake stammered, overwhelmed. He had never imagined something like this happening. Not in a million years. Elon smiled gently. You don't need to say anything right now, but know that I believe in you, Jake. You've proven that you understand what it means to be a leader, not just in terms of business, but in terms of people. Tesla needs someone who can lead with empathy, innovation, and a true sense of purpose. And I think you're that person. Jake felt a rush of emotions. He thought back to his first days at Tesla, when he had no idea how he would get through the day, much less build a career. He thought about the long nights, the sleepless moments, and the constant fear that he was never going to escape his past. And now, here he was, standing on the edge of something so much bigger than he had ever dreamed. But amid the excitement, there was still a quiet doubt in the back of his mind. Was he really ready for this? Before he could voice his concerns, Elon continued, Take your time to think about it. This isn't a decision you need to rush. But I want you to know that, regardless of what you choose, I'll always be here to support you. Jake nodded, feeling a sense of awe. Thank you, Elon. I need some time to think, but I appreciate the trust you've shown in me. As Jake left the meeting, he was filled with a mix of excitement, fear, and anticipation. He walked through the halls of Tesla, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He was about to step into a role he had never even considered, and the weight of that responsibility was not lost on him. But he knew one thing for sure. He had come this far by never backing down from a challenge, and this was just another one. In the days that followed, Jake confided in a few close colleagues, seeking advice and guidance as he processed the enormity of the decision. Emily, who had been one of the first to be inspired by Jake's story, was among the first to speak with him about it. Jake, you've already shown us all what it takes to lead, she said. This is your moment. You've earned this. Jake smiled, grateful for the support. It's not just about me, Emily. It's about the people who helped me get here. It's about creating something that lasts, something bigger than any one person. She nodded. Exactly. And you're the one who can make that happen. After several days of contemplation, Jake made his decision. He called Elon and accepted the offer to become the new CEO of Tesla. Elon's voice was filled with pride when he heard the news. Jake, I knew you'd make the right choice. Welcome to the next chapter of Tesla's story. I'm excited to see what you'll do with it. Jake was now not only the CEO of Tesla, but he was the living proof that it wasn't where you started in life that mattered. It was what you did with the opportunities you were given, how you showed up every day, and how you lifted others along the way. With Jake now at the helm of Tesla, the company entered a new era of leadership, one that was not defined solely by numbers and profits, but by a commitment to humanity, innovation, and sustainability. Jake's rise to CEO wasn't just a personal victory. It was a turning point for the entire company. Under his guidance, Tesla began to focus on more than just cutting-edge technology. It became a symbol of what it meant to take care of people, employees, customers, and the community as a whole. Jake knew that being in charge of Tesla came with immense responsibility. It wasn't about living up to Elon's legacy. It was about creating his own. He had learned that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about fostering an environment where everyone could thrive, contribute, and feel valued. He also knew that his journey, his struggles and triumphs, had given him an invaluable perspective, one that could transform the way Tesla did business. In his first few months as CEO, Jake focused on strengthening the company's culture. He worked to build stronger relationships between management and staff, emphasizing open communication, empathy, and transparency. He knew that Tesla's success wasn't just built on its revolutionary products, but on the collective effort of every single person who worked there. One of Jake's first major initiatives was the implementation of a new employee development program, one that focused on personal growth, mental health, and resilience. He wanted Tesla employees to feel supported not only professionally but emotionally as well. He knew that happy, healthy employees were the backbone of any successful company. Jake also spearheaded new programs aimed at giving back to the community. Tesla began funding scholarships for underprivileged students interested in science and technology, ensuring that the next generation of innovators would have access to the education and resources they needed to succeed. He also worked on expanding Tesla's environmental initiatives, ensuring that the company's growth didn't come at the expense of the planet. But Jake's leadership wasn't just about big programs or public initiatives. It was about the day-to-day interactions he had with his team. He made it a priority to connect with employees on all levels of the company. Whether it was a quick chat with an assembly line worker or an in-depth discussion with a senior engineer, Jake made sure that everyone's voice was heard. One afternoon, as Jake walked through the factory floor, he was approached by a young employee named Lucas, a technician who had been with Tesla for just a few months. "Mr. Jake, I just wanted to thank you," Lucas said shyly. "I've been working here for a while now, but it wasn't until you came in that I felt like this place really cared about me, not just as an employee, but as a person. I appreciate the changes you've made. It's made a big difference for me and a lot of others." Jake smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "Thank you, Lucas. That's exactly why we're here, to make sure that everyone feels like they're part of something bigger, and we're all in this together." Lucas nodded enthusiastically. "I'm proud to be here, Mr. Jake, and I know a lot of us are." Jake's heart swelled. This was the legacy he wanted to leave behind. Not just a company that was known for its groundbreaking products, but one that had touched lives, lifted people up, and provided opportunities where none seemed possible. As the years passed, Tesla continued to thrive under Jake's leadership. The company hit new milestones: faster, more efficient cars, even greater strides in renewable energy, and an ever-expanding presence in global markets. But the true measure of Tesla's success was something less tangible: the culture of empathy, innovation, and resilience that permeated every level of the organization. Jake's story had come full circle. The man who had once walked into Elon Musk's office with nothing but hope in his heart was now leading a global company, changing the world in ways he had never imagined. But what mattered most was the impact he had on the people around him. He had shown them that no matter where you came from, no matter what obstacles you faced, you could rise above it all. And that was the true power of change. One evening, as Jake sat in his office overlooking the Tesla headquarters, he reflected on his journey. From homelessness to CEO, from hopelessness to purpose. His heart swelled with gratitude for everything he had experienced and everything he had built. But he also knew that the story wasn't over. His legacy wasn't just about what he had accomplished. It was about the doors he had opened for others. As Jake looked out the window, watching the sun set over the horizon, he thought about the future. The future of Tesla, of the world, and of all the people whose lives he had touched along the way. There would always be more challenges to face, more goals to achieve, and more lives to change. But Jake knew that as long as he kept leading with purpose and empathy, Tesla would continue to shine brightly for years to come. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. What's one thing that has inspired you to push through tough times and take control of your own future? How do you lead others around you? And what's your vision for making an impact?